So if I can say welcome to everyone who's joined us so far, and I'm sure there'll be more people tipping in as we go. Thank you, everyone, other than our fabulous panel who's got your cameras off and you're on mute, which is fantastic. Chat is open. So I'm going to say if people want to make comments generally that are for the audience, feel free to use chat. If things resonate for you and you want to add to what's being said in that way. There's also the Q&A function. So any questions for the panel, if you can put those in the Q&A session, that would be great. Our aim is to talk with the panel for up to an hour, and then allow, depending on how many questions you've dropped in the Q&A session, around 15 minutes for that. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to introduce our lovely panel. I'm Bree Stevens-Hall, KC, barrister in practice at Gatehouse, and I'm chairing this evening, but that's more than enough about me. Our fabulous panelists are Tribunal Judge Amanda Brown, KC. Amanda qualified as a solicitor in, I hope she'll forgive me, 1993. Was a solicitor advocate and established KPMG's tax litigation practice, doing that from 1999 to 2023. Amanda took Silk in 2021, so she's one of those very rare people, female and a solicitor with KC after her name, so fantastic. And Amanda is now a salaried judge in the tax chamber. So in many ways, and according to the KC website, she is a trailblazer. She's very proactive around diversity in the judiciary, which I know from other meetings, but also has experienced working with menopause education and understanding and practicalities in the workplace, not in chambers, KPMG, obviously, but so she brings a very interesting perspective to the topic we're going to be talking about. Amanda is also the mother of 2 adult girls, an Ironman and open swimming enthusiast, which we shall be coming back to in one sense shortly. We also have Linda Bailey. After a career working with the police, Linda moved into working in the menopause space and has been doing that for over a decade. She is a passionate advocate and educator around menopause awareness, first as Talking Menopause, and now under the banner of her new business, Making Menopause Work. So bringing a positive outlook to how we can make workplaces actually function well for those going through the menopause. And the mission statement of Making Menopause Work is, our mission is to normalise the menopause in your workplace, one conversation at a time. So here's a conversation. We'll have lots of bits where Linda will be able to help us with that. And then we have Lindsay de Maizière, I'm cracking up. Lindsay, too many L's in this conversation. Lindsay de Maizière, KC, who practices at 24 Old Buildings in insolvency company and regulatory work. Lindsay took Silk in 2018 and since then has moved her practice into full-time mediator, arbitrator, and sits extensively on disciplinary panels as a chair for various regulators, including recently the House of Commons. Not as a regulator, but their disciplinary stuff. So that will be interesting. Away from the bar, Lindsay is also a mum of 2 teenagers and a wild swimming enthusiast. So there's some common themes here with our panel. Lindsay is the barrister who was responsible for first raising the question of the menopause awareness, its impact on retention and progression with the Bar Council. Back in 2020, she drafted the initial menopause policy templates that the Bar Council put out and the content for the wellbeing at the bar menopause pages. I then jumped on her bandwagon and have been working with Lindsay, although she does the majority of the work, I have to say, around menopause, where we've conducted a bar survey, drafted the Bar Council's response to the Government Equalities Committee inquiry into the impact of the menopause, met with lots of people, taken part in seminars, written articles, and I think our favourite, worked with the Chancery Bar Association to establish a menopause cafe where women can talk, with lots of humour and a bit of music in the background. So that's an introduction to our panel. In terms of the topic, Amanda has offered to read a poem that was written by a friend of hers, who I think it's fair to say had an extraordinarily bad time with the menopause and seems to have experienced a huge number of the symptoms. But it seemed to us it would set a scene very well. Amanda, if I hand over to you.
So yeah, this is a poem by Fiona Russell, who is a school friend of mine, called This Is My Menopause. I'm wide awake, in pain. It's 3 a.m. I'm half asleep. I've taken painkillers. The pain is numbed. It's only 9:30 a.m. It's period pain, except there is no period this month, nor the last, but the one before was big. It was a monster. I feel dizzy, spaced out, but I must focus. I have work to do. I like my work. I want to work. The sweats are here again. The wet lashes down my back. My head feels hot. My hair is damp, rank. My face is red. I want to strip off my clothes, but suddenly I'm cold again. I shiver. It makes me cry. It makes me shy. It makes me stressed and depressed. I've put on weight. I've lost my shape. Where did my boobs go? They were great once. Now they're not. My skin feels loose. My skin looks lumpy. My thighs are bumpy. How can they be bumpy? But they are. My partner tries, he really does, but the moods, the swings from this to that, from happy to sad, the roundabout of attitudes, positive, negative, then the sighs of resignation, the sleepless nights, my restlessness, my restless leg, the left one. He wants to scream at me. I want to scream at him. It's testing us. But he does try to understand. He really does. He gives me leg cramps. He gives me foot cramps. Even my hands cramp. One shoulder. Just one, thank goodness. These cramps are so bad, they tear my muscles. He gives me migraines. Migraines so bad I go to bed. I've never slept during the day before. My arms are scratched. I scratch at itchy skin. I have scars. Scars where my nails have scratched. I want sex. I don't want sex. I do. I don't. When I do, it hurts. I end up with an infection, bladder infection. Yet again, yet again. Who knew all this could be to do with it? I once looked young, young for my years. Now I look my age. I look more than my age when I don't sleep. I feel more than my age. I fear I have dementia. I can't remember. I can't remember your name or their name or dates or the name for small things. I can't remember where I put it. That thing I lost for weeks. I'll buy a new one. Well, I tried to, except that I'd forgotten my PIN number. I smell strange smells. My taste is all wrong. My eyes feel dry. I'm nauseous. If I wasn't so old, I might be pregnant, but I'm definitely not. Now I have another period. It's 2 weeks early. The pain of this period is as bad as childbirth. It's ironic. The period feels like Niagara Falls, except it's not magnificent or a great wonder of the world. It's big and mighty, though. Can't leave home, might flood out. And that would be too much. I am still fit for my age, but my age is almost 50. And I'm not fast anymore. I have to accept this. I have slow days. I have even slower days. And sometimes I have good days. And I feel fast and fit again. I've taken advice. I've listened to women. All women of a certain age. My certain age. And to the doctors too. I'm on HRT. It's okay. It helps sometimes, but there's no cure. My hormones are in meltdown. I find calm in the outdoors. I walk, run, cycle, and ski. That raises my spirits. I try to laugh, I really do, and life goes on. I like my life. I like my work. I'm happy. I love my partner. I have many friends. My daughter has left home. She's happy too. But if I laugh too hard with my partner and friends, I must remember to hold on tight, down below, or else I'll wean myself. All this and more is the menopause. The menopause is really no fun at all.
Thank you, Amanda. Linda, perhaps we can come to you first to really help us with some of the sort of fundamental information for people to understand. What is the menopause? When does it occur? How long? That sort of thing.
Yeah, thank you, Brie. And I took a couple of points from that poem, and which I think really resonates probably with all of us here today. Is I like work, I want to work. And that is so important. So it's finding the way that we can actually do that. And we are going to talk about that. What I would like to say, Brie, is that the chat function is open. And for all of you out there, if you have got something that you want to say about menopause and you want to share that within this environment, please do that, because the more that we can do that, the more we can have this normal conversation, then the better it's going to be for all of us. So if there's anything that I say that you want to comment upon, you want to ask a question about, then please do on the chat function. So I've been given the job of talking about what is the menopause. So in its most basic medical definition, it's when our periods stop. And that almost implies, doesn't it, that it's a fairly straightforward process. Our periods stop. And when we haven't had a period for 12 consecutive months, then that is menopause. And it's almost that implication of this one day. But we know that that's not actually true. And so what happens is, before those 12 months, we have a time that leads up to it, which is called the perimenopause. So the time leading up to that. And after that, we are postmenopausal. But we tend to use that word menopause to describe all of that event. And that's because the symptoms and the solutions are the same throughout, albeit that they might change and fluctuate. And the other thing I'm just going to ask, if anybody wants to contribute to before I go any further, what are the positives around menopause? Anybody got any positives around it? Because there are some. And if you feel that you know what they are and you want to drop on the chat function, that'd be fantastic if you do. So what is happening at this perimenopausal stage is that our hormones are starting to change. And so that as a result of that, it is impacting on us. It's causing our symptoms. And so what's happening is that we have estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And those are the hormones that impact upon us when we are experiencing menopause. And as our ovarian function starts to decline, then these hormones start to decline as well. And that's what starts to cause these symptoms. So how long does the average menopause last for? Anybody got any thoughts on that? How long does the average menopause last for? And it's going to be different for every single person. And the big takeaway around menopause is that it is an absolutely unique experience. And so although there is commonality between symptoms, each one of us is going to experience different symptoms for a different amount of time, and the way we react to that, our approach to it, is all going to be different. And many people talk about, well, is it different if I'm from a different ethnic background or a different cultural background? And yes, it can be. But the real conversation there is that most of the research that when we talk about menopause is based on white females. But what we're seeing as this is expanding is that there is a bigger conversation actually taking place. So back to menopause, perimenopause, menopause, haven't had a period for 12 consecutive months, and then we are postmenopausal, and we will be postmenopausal for the rest of our lives. The average age for us to reach menopause here in the UK is 51. but that is average. Everything I talk about is average because it's a unique experience. And there are parameters, 45 to 55, 1 in 100 under the age of 40, 1 in 1,000 under the age of 30 will experience a premature menopause. We don't always know why that is actually going to happen. Some people will experience menopause as a result of surgery. And then will be thrown straight into surgical menopause with this sudden onset of symptoms. Some people will experience a medical menopause because they've had maybe some treatment for cancer, radiotherapy, something like that, which has damaged the ovaries, and that can bring around those symptoms as well. And I think what's really important to think about is that we associate menopause maybe with a female who might be a little bit older. But actually, when people experience menopause younger, it can be an even bigger challenge because it's really much harder to have that conversation. And of course, with menopause, that is the end of fertility. And so with that can come a grieving process as well. And very often that is underestimated. So how many symptoms are there around menopause? Now, we heard so many during the poem that we heard there. And there are physical symptoms, there are psychological symptoms, there are cognitive challenges around menopause. So the general consensus around number of symptoms is around about 34. But if you talk to a lot of menopause specialists, they will say there's far more than that. So the biggest symptom that we associate with menopause is a hot flush. But not everybody experiences a hot flush. It's not the first sign of menopause for a lot of people. And as I say, some people will never experience a hot flush at all. But it's usually that symptom that we have a little bit of a joke about that everybody can associate with. But the symptoms that impact on people the most, and we'll hear a little bit more about that, are the cognitive challenges that people experience. So I find it quite liberating. So those cognitive challenges. So a lot of people will experience increased levels of anxiety, for example, and maybe anxiety around things that they've never been anxious about before. So there's a lot around driving anxiety. There's a lot about our work, and maybe within the role that we carry out, that we start to lose some confidence in that. And then, has everybody heard of the term brain fog? So brain fog is this umbrella term that we use to describe the cognitive challenges that people can experience during menopause. So those moments where maybe we've forgotten somebody's name, maybe we've forgotten how to carry out a particular task, for example. Maybe, as somebody mentioned to me on a session last week, I forgot my children's names. And she said, for goodness sake, I actually named them. How can I actually forget their names? But when these things start to happen, and again, it was mentioned in the poem there, the story that people are telling themselves is dementia. This is what's happening. And then that puts us in a really scary place. And then we really don't want to talk about it because we don't want people to know about that. So these symptoms are going to vary. So some people will have no symptoms at all. So around about 20% of people will have no symptoms of menopause. They will still experience it, but not have the symptoms. At the other end of that scale, there will be 20% of people who experience really severe symptoms around menopause and severity around not being able to function. And everybody else will sit somewhere in the middle of that. Now, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what our menopause is going to be like. We can ask our moms about it. We can ask our female relatives. And there is a suggestion that if early menopause runs in, it can run in families, but not necessarily. But it's really important, if we can, to have those conversations. So what can we do from a personal point of view around when we start to become aware of these symptoms? So normally at this perimenopausal stage, what we might start to see is a change in our period. So they might become heavier, they might become lighter, they might start to look a bit different, a bit further apart, or a bit closer together. We might start to see these changes. We might have the odd hot flush, for example, and we might have that brain fog moment. We might have those mood swings. So we're starting to see something a little bit different. But what happens normally is, because of the average age of perimenopause is around about 45, then what we do is put that down to something else happening in our life. So we're really busy. We're a bit irritable because the kids are playing up. We're losing our confidence because we've just been put into a new role. And so we've always got a different solution for it. So what I'm saying to people is that at this stage, that is when we need to start paying attention. So what feels a little bit different? Because sometimes we don't join the dots. So the more education we have around it, the more that we understand it, the more that we have these conversations, then we can join those dots. So what we want to do then is start to have a look at these symptoms. Then we want to try and record those symptoms if we can. So we can do that through an app. We can do it on a piece of paper, but let's start to see what that pattern looks like. And then when we've got that information, done our own research, been our own detectives, then we can do something with it. So then what are we going to do? How are we going to help ourselves through the challenges around menopause? And there are lots of solutions, and I'm sure some of you know about some of those, and we'll discuss them as well. So HRT is one of those. Hormone replacement therapy does what it says on the tin, replaces some of the hormones that we are losing as we're experiencing menopause. For some people, it is an absolutely golden pill. It works for them. It's transformational. It really, really helps. For some people, it doesn't. Not everybody can take HRT. Should everybody take it? Not everybody needs to take it if they don't want to. But that's something that we can do. But we also need to have this information around our symptoms, because if we are going to have a conversation with a medical professional, then sometimes that can be a bit post-contrary. So we need to have that information.
Yeah.
Oh, is somebody not unmuted?
Esther, can you go on mute, please? Thank you.
So we want to understand our symptoms, and then we want to have a look at potentially what those solutions are going to be. So one of them can be HRT. One can be alternative medicines, for example. So for some people, supplements may work, not for everybody, but there is no evidence to suggest or scientific evidence to prove their efficacy or otherwise around that. And lifestyle. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to take 2 steps back and think, okay, what is my lifestyle? Can I start to do different things? Because if we can look at our stress levels, we can look at our sleep patterns, we can look at what we're eating, what we're putting into our body, the kind of movement that we're doing, all of that is going to help us to manage our symptoms. And CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which is, some of you may have heard of that or even been part of it, telling ourselves that different story. And one of the biggest things that we can do is acceptance, because we can't dodge it, we can't avoid it, it is going to happen. So acceptance would be the biggest thing that I would say is going to help us to manage our menopausal symptoms. And I'm very conscious, Bree, that I am looking at the time there. So I think hopefully that gives
I'm just going to ask you one more thing.
Okay.
In terms of sort of factual information,
yeah,
are there particular places you would say to people they can go to find out more?
Yeah, so obviously the NHS, British Menopause Society is another one. Balance Menopause, that's got a load of resources on there to help. So if you're looking for that kind of support, that's where I would suggest that you would look.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Linda. That's been fantastic. So now I'm going to turn to Lindsay and Amanda and ask you a few questions. You've both agreed, thank you very much, to talk a bit personally about your experience and how it's impacted you professionally. So perhaps if I can start with Lindsay, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your experience of the menopause.
Yeah, I was given an unexpected diagnosis of early menopause, which Linda mentioned, when I was 37, and I'd been struggling with symptoms for about 4 years before that. They were primarily, in my case, cognitive symptoms. I had really severe memory loss and brain fog, all of that sort of general stuff. But the memory loss was really impacting my work, and I lost a lot of self-confidence, and was very anxious and depressed really around that time. So I'm now 48, and if you fast forward through quite a lot of that, I've been managing successfully with the symptoms of menopause since then with HRT, and that's worked really well for me. But I've done a lot of work, as Bree said, thinking and working about the impact of menopause on the bar, and that was not least because before I started on HRT and sort of got things organised, I came really close to leaving the bar. I think because the symptoms that I was experiencing were so they were very intense, and because the nature of our work is so intellectually demanding, the fact that I couldn't remember anything, and I was forgetting what I was doing, and I had to be completely propped up with notes, even in a conference, to just remember the names of a client. To go to court trying to remember what I was asking for. I mean, it was really impacting my work, and it caused me the most enormous amount of self-doubt. I got to the point really where I thought, I can't in all good conscience keep doing this. I'm going to make a mistake somewhere, and it's going to be really dreadful. I've got to get out of this career. I think because of that experience. Go on, sorry, Bree.
I was just going to ask you, what made you realise it was the menopause?
Yeah, I didn't join the dots at all, really, and I think that was at least initially because I was, I was so young. I mean, 37, not that young, but for this conversation, it's relatively young, and it wasn't on my radar at all. And we had I mean, one of the commonalities I think that people will hear between the various experiences people describe is people often say, oh, I thought I had early onset dementia, and I at 37 I really believe that, because I've got a history of that amongst female members of my family. It was a credible explanation, and there wasn't any other reason in my mind why I would be having those sorts of experiences. And so I had no idea about it at all, and it got more and more severe, really. I think I got to the stage really where I'd sort of resigned myself to the fact that this was happening, something degenerative was happening, and it was going to mean that I was going to leave my job. I was going to have to make arrangements for the kids. I was going to make a lot of, adjustments to my life. But something in the back of my mind sort of persuaded me to that I couldn't accept that. And actually, the more I drilled into it, I thought, well, hang on a minute, there are definitely periods where I'm totally lucid and I feel myself. And looking, I think Linda said keeping a diary was a good idea. I don't think I sort of actually kept one, but I started to try and notice patterns and realised that there was definitely a cyclical element to when I felt well, and when I definitely was experiencing much worse cognitive problem.
Can I stop you there and bring Amanda in?
Yeah.
Come back to you and what helped and
Sure.
what shift you've done professionally. Amanda, in terms of you and your experience of menopause.
So I think, I mean, having just heard Lindsay, mine was perhaps a walk in the park, but I'm not sure that it was. In 2010, I had a breakdown, and I hadn't had a period since the first period. The last period before my second child was born. So the first day of my last period was the 1st of August 1997, and I had a coil. So I have had a very lucky adult female life because I haven't had periods. But my menopause really started with anxiety, particularly morning anxiety. So I would wake up and I would literally be in a panic, almost unable to breathe, not able to eat. And I was obsessed and focused on the fact that it was something that I was going to do or get wrong at work. And everything that had led to my breakdown in 2010, I thought, no, I don't feel like that, but my manifestations of anxiety were like that. And the only way I could manage my morning anxiety was through excessive early exercise. So I would get up very early and exercise very hard. And then I could just about cope, until the cognitive stuff then kicked in. And I remember one day, it was just before we were due to go on holiday, and my life was manic, and it was run by my secretary pinging my phone to tell me what I had to go and do next. And I got a ping, and it said, due in meeting room 2020, on the first floor, room 21, and it's with this client. And I left where I was, and I thought, I know that I've prepared for this meeting. I can remember sitting in that room there, having a discussion with these people, but I can't remember what the issue is. I can't remember what the issue is. And I walked into the meeting with the client a little bit late because I'd come from something else. And I thought, please let me remember what this meeting is about before I have to say something. And I sat there, and fortunately it wasn't my meeting. And I just kept there, sitting there thinking, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm going to say, because I've no idea what's going on in this room. Literally no idea what's going on in this room. I might as well not be in this room. And then somebody asked me a question, and some words came out of my mouth. And I still don't know whether those words were correct or not. But I was in such a state. I just thought, how can I lead a busy team, go into court, if this is what it's like? Fortunately, we went on holiday, and I was lying in bed scrolling, and I read Fiona's poem. And the thing that leapt out at me were the two stanzas on anxiety and anxiety, depression, and amnesia, and getting Alzheimer's. And I thought, oh, really? And I rang Fiona. I was on the other side of the world. And I said, is that really a thing? And she said, it's really a thing. And it was like, I felt like I was walking on air. Thank goodness it's just the menopause. I can deal with this. Like, women for centuries before me have managed this. And so it was then going to the GP, like Lindsay. I went on to HRT. I did read a very good book called Estrogen Matters, because I was obsessed. I couldn't go on HRT because obviously I was going to get breast cancer if I went on HRT. And I read the book, and it was debunked loads and loads of myths. And once I'd got my HRT at the right level, which didn't happen immediately. And when I first went on,
quite a journey, can't it?
And when I first went on HRT, it was in that period around 2018-19 where there were national shortages. And one of my best workplace examples, which I will use in the last question that you ask, arose after one day when I couldn't pick up my HRT patches, and I literally screamed down the phone to the doctors, you don't understand, I have to have some patches. Where can I find some patches? And they did recognize that I probably needed some, and we changed. But
well, I certainly recognize that. I failed to order my replacement. I have bioidentical HRT, and I failed to order the replacement. And my partner said to me 2 days after I ran out, get some new supplies because I don't recognize you. And yeah, I certainly recognize the complete loss of self-confidence, the anxiety, and I was someone who had a lot of problem with being permanently hot. I don't know about the flushes idea. For me, permanently hot, and as some others know, a lot of vaginal dryness. And it's quite difficult to concentrate when you are standing up in a court, when all of that physically is going on and you're feeling so self-conscious. After that, I'm going to come back to you, Lindsay. to ask a bit more about what helped.
I mean, the biggest help physically and cognitively has been HRT. I mean, I'm always chary about saying that because it sounds like a hard sell, and there's lots of different ways for. I mean, the main thing that stood out from all of the work that you and I have done on this, I think, is the fact that everybody's experience is individual. And so, I mean, I know lots of people manage without that, but it has been a great help to me. And also sort of taking little steps. So I think that, well, the first step that I took was not little, you know, to actually go to the doctor and try and work out whether what was going on was something that was hormonal or was it degenerative. That was a big step. But once I'd done that professionally, I think little steps really helped. So, you know, I decided that I would try and just minimize work to the extent of doing things that I was feeling confident in. And weirdly, I know this is different to your experience, Bree, because we talked about it before, but weirdly for me, going to court actually was something that I did feel more confident in than in say conferences or other sort of scenarios. I think probably because, you know, I got a huge dose of adrenaline around going to court and probably anxiety and nerves, but that had a compensatory effect on some of the brain fog. So I actually felt okay in court, and I tried to sort of stick more to doing court work, and one of the consequences of that was I then decided to go back onto the government panel, you know, the Attorney General's panel, to apply to go back onto that I'd come off when I was worrying about it all. But and that then reintroduced even more court work, and ultimately kind of law of unintended consequences that led to me taking silk once I was, you know, I was feeling a lot better by this stage. I mean, it didn't just happen, but
so in your case, it helped progression.
It helped, yeah. So I think little steps.
Amanda,
HRT, yeah.
And Amanda, what helped and how's it impacted you professionally?
So as I've already said, and echoing Lindsay, HRT. But the two things that I would say really made a difference were exercise. I needed to do the exercise to manage the anxiety, but I also, in the end, needed to do the exercise just because it was the one place where I was alone with me and it, the exercise and the menopause. But Lindsay and I both enjoy swimming. There's nothing quite so fabulous as being in cold water, and the sort of mindfulness of being in cold water, because you're just thinking about being in cold water. But the other thing I think really helped was being very open about what was happening, how I felt. You know, I led a big team of people, and I always talk to them about, you know, leaning in and leaning on others, and, you know, when things aren't right, being open about it and being supportive as a team. And so that was the first time really that I properly said, this is what's happening to me, and I need you all to help me, you know, when I forget stuff, because I had a reputation as being the person who remembered everything all of the time, and I became the person who forgot everything all of the time. And I needed them to remind me, you know, sometimes where I was going, what meetings I needed to be in, to talk me through prep. And we got little buzzwords when we were preparing that would trigger a memory of what we've been talking about. And so I think that was being open, sharing, and trusting other people to not support me through the process, but not to make it worse. You know, I wanted a work environment where I could say, sorry, I'm having a moment, in the way, and people not look at you as if you're some alien that just stepped out of a flying saucer.
I know exactly what you mean, Amanda. I was always known as someone who was fabulous with logistics, and I could reprioritize in my head huge numbers of things and be very clear about where I was going. And so my practice team had to know, I had to tell them that wasn't working anymore. That wasn't happening. And I needed them to actually step into that space and help me with that and be more proactive around that, because I wasn't the person I'd always been, so far as that's concerned. That feels like a natural place to come back to you, Linda, and talking about the workplace and hints and tips for women and for their work environments.
Sorry, can I just mention one other thing?
Yes, certainly.
Which is the proper segue into Linda. Just after I'd had my moment about my HRT, I was going through the appraisal process, and I had an appraisal in which my 2 male line managers had said that they felt that I was too emotional in the workplace. And when they said it, I was just wounded. And then after my absolute hysteria over the HRT, I spoke to them and I said, would you say this emotional individual has been here always or just in the last 12 months? And they said, well, much worse in the last 12 months. And I said, right, well, you're not putting on that on my form then, because that's because I'm menopausal and I'm doing the very best I can, but you cannot write that in my appraisal because that is effectively discriminating against me. And they were a little bit shocked. And I said to one of them, who is my age, I said, can you just ask your wife whether, talk to your wife about the conversation we've just had? And he came back to me about 2 weeks later and he said, thank you for saying what you said about what I said in your appraisal, because I did talk to my wife, and I think our life together is going to be very different, because she reinforced exactly everything you said, and I had just not thought about it.
Thank you, Amanda. That's fantastic. Linda.
Thank you. Really valid points that have been made there. And what I would say about the workplace is that nobody can understand the impact of menopause on an individual unless that individual tells them. And we have real examples from Lindsay and Amanda on how they actually did that. And that is the most important thing. And one of the other things that I think we have to be really careful of is that we don't label every female over 45 as a walking menopause symptom. We don't need our colleagues to identify menopause. We don't need them to pick out the symptoms that they recognise. But what we do want them to do is to have a level of knowledge and understanding that menopause happens. We can't avoid it. So how can we start to support our colleagues? And it isn't just down to us as the people who are experiencing those symptoms to speak up about it. We need allies, we need our colleagues to be able to support us when we need to. And the examples that are given there, I honestly truly believe that we should be able to say in the workplace, I am having a brain fog moment. What does that actually mean? Well, that means at this moment in time, I cannot remember that piece of information, or I cannot remember your name. That does not mean that I cannot do my job, and it does not mean that in an hour's time I will have still forgotten. So it's in the workplace for me, it's very much, like your symptom checker that you have when you're looking at your symptoms. You almost need that same kind of process that you have for how menopause impacts you in the workplace. So a lot of organisations use reasonable adjustment passports, wellness plans. So that what we can do is we can say, right, okay, this is my menopause. This is how it impacts on me. This is how it makes my job harder. So what are the things that I feel that I can do that is going to ease that is going to help that? Then once I have that evidence again, if you like, then I have a conversation with the people around me who need to know. So it may be a line manager, it may be our colleagues, and then we can tell them how it impacts, and we can say to them, well, when this happens, this is how you can support me. And because it's this individual process, as we know, then for some people, if I forget a word, I forget a name, I forget something, for some people, somebody jumping in, it's going to really help them. but for other people, it's going to make them feel worse. So we really need to determine what that support actually looks like. And because all of our jobs are different and our reaction to our symptoms are different, that's why it has to be, again, really, really individualized. But the biggest challenge, I think, in the workplace, and this is why these things really help, is why don't we talk about it in the first place? And Amanda talked about leading a team. I honestly think that as female leaders within organisations, then there is almost that responsibility on us to be able to say this stuff out loud, to be able to say what is actually happening to us, because it has a huge impact on those people who work in the organisation. If they can see the people at the top of the organisation having that conversation, then it's really beneficial. But people don't talk about it at work because they feel that they won't be taken seriously. They feel that it could impact on their role. They feel that maybe if there's redundancies coming up, that they're going to be in that box for redundancy. Other people are going to think I am less able to do my job. So those are the barriers. So when we're having conversations like this, that is how we start to break down those barriers. And that education around what menopause is and the differences for people. My belief is that if you manage people, you manage menopause. Every single manager or people with supervisory responsibility need to know about menopause, and they need to be open to have that conversation around it. The Fawcett Society did some research a couple of years ago. It was part of the Davina programme, where they said 1 in 10 women have left organisations because of menopausal symptoms. And you can see, hopefully everybody on this call can see, that there are at least 3 or 4 people, well, at least 4 people on this call who have not left their organisation because of those menopausal symptoms. So I truly believe that we can change that narrative around it. And by setting out the examples that you have there, then people can see that it is actually possible to be able to do that. So it's in the workplace, it's about it. It's a balance between normalizing it and not having it as an exceptional conversation, and we're a little bit somewhere in between at the moment, I think. But where we want to get is to just have that normal everyday conversation around it where it is fully accepted. So in my mind, education, open, honest organizations where we can bring ourselves to work and not feel that we're falling down at that hormone hurdle. And there's a level of acceptance around it, because if we think about when these hormonal challenges come in at puberty, at pregnancy, at perimenopause, then we need to really acknowledge that menopause brings those challenges, but it doesn't make us less of a person. And I just want to show everybody, but I'm not advertising, I'm not getting any royalties. There is a book, I don't know whether you can see it, actually, it's not coming. It's called The Menopause Brain, and it's by Dr. Lisa Mosconi. And she is a neuroscientist and a women's brain health specialist. And she talks about menopause and the impact on the brain. And if you are experiencing anxiety and cognitive challenges around menopause, it puts it into a fantastic perspective. And she refers to it as cognitive slippage, which I think is a wonderful word, a wonderful description, and talks about the validity of some of the challenges that we face. So open and honest workplace environments, that's what I would call for in the workplace.
So Linda, I'm taking away from that cognitive slippage and my hormonal hurdle. All our hurdles are different. Yes. I love that, hormonal. So perhaps if I can sort of open up for a discussion between the 3 of you before we come to, we've got one question Q&A, and maybe some more will appear. But for all of you, really, if you had the knowledge you have now, how do you think your menopause journey or your hormone hurdle experience would have differed? Lindsay, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, I can say something. I mean, I have to be honest. You know, the description that you and Amanda gave about how you handled your menopause symptoms very openly. I was not that person. I was a person who totally concealed it, and I think partly because I was young and it had an association with sort of being older. but all the things that Linda was just mentioning there, you know, the negative connotations around it, the fact that I didn't want anyone to know about it because I thought that you know, they might well think that my sort of career trajectory is on a downer. There were lots of reasons why I didn't discuss it, even when I knew what it was and I was handling it. So I think, you know, if I was going to do it again, I know actually that I would have been well supported, because the people around me in Chambers are good people, and they would have helped me. You know, my practice manager would have helped me. So I think had I done it again, I would definitely have had those conversations much more openly. I wouldn't have concealed it and kind of tried to mute myself in the way that I did at that time. And I would definitely have needed much more help with the sorts of things that you and Amanda both mentioned about diary management and organisation, and you know, a bit more, just a bit more sort of support like that. So if I was doing it again, I would not mute and conceal and kind of try and be navigating through tiny alleys to get somewhere. I would be much more open about it, I think.
Amanda. Oh, you're muted.
I think I just wish that menopause had been a thing that was in conversation before I started experiencing it. You know, it wasn't a particularly long period before I read Fiona's poem, but it was very, very frightening. And that's the only word I can use to describe it, frightening. And if I had, you know, my mum didn't talk to me about it. My kids have already had enough. They're only 30 and 27, and there's like, do we have to have another menopause conversation, mum? You know, I just wish it had been one of those things that everybody talked about, that everybody knew about, wasn't a taboo subject. And that's why I've been, quite frankly, such a gobshite for the last 6 years, everywhere I've gone. You know, I do look for opportunities to talk about it. I don't just shove it into conversations, but I just think that I wish that more people had started to bring it out in the open, and that's what we're now all doing.
Indeed. Linda, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, or how we talk to people about it.
Yeah, the biggest injustice for me, and it still remains this, is that so many of us arrive at this stage in our lives and we don't know about it. And that now still makes me a little bit angry, although we are trying to change that. And so I'm very much with Amanda on this, that if these conversations had been taking place, then I would have not felt so alone. I would not have felt ashamed. I would not have felt like my life was over, that there are people who are experiencing similar things to me, and it's okay. And I think that is the thing for me, which is why I'm so passionate about it, because even now on the calls that I do, I have people who feel alone and isolated, and females are over 50% of the population. We should not feel alone and isolated. And so I wish that we could have talked about it more. I wish there was somebody who would have almost pulled me to one side and said, it's all right, you know, it's only the menopause. You are gonna survive. And also that it is a transitional period and you are not always going to feel like it. There is going to be a time when you feel absolutely fantastic and in control of your life and really enjoying it again. And I think I needed somebody to be able to tell me that when I was at my lowest. That would have worked.
I think that comes to a couple of questions we've got in the chat. So there is a question: does the cognitive slippage last forever, or does it pass after a while?
For most people, in my knowledge around it, it does pass, although we might be a little bit different. And so that acceptance, we might have to do things in a slightly different way. But I know I've talked about that book again, but it talks about rewiring your brain. And that's what is actually happening. So the cognitive slippage for most people will pass. Some people will experience menopausal symptoms for the rest of their lives. And we don't know who that's going to be. But for most of us, it will pass. So that's the good news.
Yeah, I think just to say, I think that HRT in my case did resolve those issues that I had about the memory and other things. So I mean, as I say, I'm a bit chary about being a poster girl for HRT when it might not suit everybody, but yeah, it didn't last forever because I got something that sorted it out, I think.
Now, I was just going to say about the talking to people, I'm always very conscious that some people are quite private and actually wouldn't naturally talk about this sort of subject. But as someone who, to use Amanda's, it's a bit of a gobshite. If you ask me a question, I'll answer the question honestly. I realised that actually by being open about my situation and making it part of a conversation, that even for those women who are more private and don't want to talk about their own circumstances, it puts it in the dialogue and in the workplace. So I was going to ask, is there a role for men in this discussion? Thoughts on that? Amanda?
100% yes. I mean, at KPMG, we ran an event for men following the interaction that I'd had on appraisals. So it was built into the kind of teaching on how to do appraisals and how to have sensible conversations. But, you know, the way we pitched it was every one of us who works in a workplace that's got women is going to come into contact with menopausal women, whether you're a 23-year-old man or a 23-year-old woman, and everything else. So understanding, just having a better understanding of what is likely to be impacting the lives of people around you is always valuable. And it's very easy for me to say, I guess, because I worked in a pretty open, but not without its problems also, organisation, which is not really similar to Chambers because we are forced to be more team-like. But, you know, I was just about to say his name. What my old boss said was he had never thought about it, and his wife had not talked to him about it, but he was glad. And so the men that came to the event were also pretty positive when they felt it was helpful and useful. So I think, yes, there is a role for men to be engaged in this dialogue.
I completely agree with that. And the example that springs to mind of male, you know, allyship, I suppose is the right word, isn't it, for this? Is I was given an example by someone I was speaking to of a male boss who was having a conversation with an experienced woman who was you know, in her early 50s, but who had really had a difficult time and was thinking of leaving whatever organisation it was that they were in. And he said to her, don't leave, because even operating at 50% of your capacity is worth 10 people less experienced and talented. So, you know, people should definitely stick with it and try and find ways that help them across the whole spectrum. Now that at least we're all talking about it, and there are so many different ways of helping each other, but that's been something that's developed hugely in the last few years. But it just struck me that you know, that example of not leaving is a really important one.
And Linda, what do you find in terms of going into workplaces and men's involvement and engagement with that?
What I have seen over the last 7 years that I've been exclusively working in this is that more and more men are coming to the table. More and more men are having those conversations. When I do employee awareness sessions, there's an increasing number of men who are attending those sessions. And on my Champion Network meeting today, there was a couple of champions within organisations who said that a couple of men had been to the sessions that they'd actually run around menopause, and they said, who would want to be a woman? I really didn't know all of this happened. I really didn't understand some of those challenges that they have. And I think there is sometimes there can be an awkwardness around it because it's women's things and we don't want to talk about them. But actually, for a lot of men, especially if they're in a relationship with a female, that there is an almost that eye-opening. I understand what's happening there. That there are things I can do to help and support, and I think that's what we're trying to see more, that people are being more supportive, and we need allies. We need to have men who are having those conversations and who are being supportive around us, because the bottom line is we're in this together, aren't we? There's no escape from it. We're all in it together.
And Linda, you probably won't know this, but when you came to Chambers and did your session, a young member of my organisation spoke to the person who organised the session internally and said, I'm going to go home and give my mum the biggest hug ever. Because there was that sudden realisation of what was going on.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've got some questions from the audience. If I could start with, how would you approach a brain fog moment if it happens in court? I started early menopause at 36, and it was a real struggle, even on HRT. Don't know if Lindsay or Amanda wants to jump in with that, or I can.
Fortunately, Hannah, it didn't happen to me, but I think it didn't happen to me, at least in part, as Lindsay said. I get myself into such a state before I go to court. I'm like coursing with adrenaline, which I think helps to a degree. It's not a good solution, but it is a solution. But I almost pushed myself into the ground, preparing and re-preparing and having loads and loads of stickers and triggers, which in the end I didn't need. But knowing I had them gave me the confidence, or embedded it firmly enough that when I needed to fish into my brain and get that word out, I was able to do so. So I'm sorry, that's not a very useful answer, but
oh no, I think it is useful, and I agree that actually, preempting it by, I mean, I think I used my court area that used to look like a sort of interrogation room with bits of stickers everywhere to try and remember everything I needed to keep my finger on the pulse of. But when a brain fog moment struck, to sort of try and deal with that, so that has definitely happened to me. I think basically, I certainly didn't say, "Excuse me, it's menopause." I mean, I maybe we're going to get to that point, and that will be fine. But certainly, when that was something that was an issue, it wasn't where I went. But a charming smile, a little bit of humour, and just regrouping, stopping and saying, "I've lost my train of thought. Just give me a moment," and then it never ever harmed what I was saying. That would be my experience of it. Just take a minute, breathe, have a look where you are, and readdress.
Yeah. I mean,
and have a damn good junior.
Yes.
I mean, the Lady Chancellor is encouraging us all to make sure that our juniors have more of an opportunity to speak. Be honest with your junior and make sure that they're all over it. And if you need to, sit down and get them to stand up. When I was Silk at the time, but I was led by another Silk who at one point, with no warning at all, just said, I think it'd be much better if Mrs. Brown made the submissions on this point and sat down. So but if you are working with your junior and your junior knows that there's a risk of that, I mean, all of these things probably just preempt it. But what a fantastic opportunity for juniors.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a little bit of both of what you've said. I certainly have had it happening, and I was very clear on the way I prepared for trials and cross-examination and submissions and what I had in front of me. And actually, my preparation now has a couple of extra layers to it. I have my lists and my notes with my bullet points on, but I also have a searchable document on my computer that I can use to try and find something and jog my memory. But the reality is, it can happen to anyone for any number of reasons. And I always say to my pupils, the point at which you start to realize that you've arrived and this is your place of work is when you're able to say to a judge, hang on a minute, I just, not quite like that, but can you give me a minute, my lord? I just need to collect my thoughts. And actually, with judges that I have a proper sense of, have met. A couple of them I have said, I'm having a menopausal moment. I wouldn't say that to a judge I didn't know and didn't have the measure on. As Lindsay says, hopefully we'll get to a point where we can be confident that everyone does get that, and we'll give you a minute, and respectfully. So perhaps the next question, I'm interested in how women high achievers cope with not being able to perform at pace. I used to be better than I am now. I'm still high performing, but it's harder work, and I don't want to accept that. Any thoughts around that?
But I think, oh, sorry. I was going to say it's around that word acceptance, isn't it? And it is around that word. And sometimes menopause changes us in ways that we might not have wanted to change. But when we start to accept that actually we might be a little different, but different's okay as well, then I think that helps. And I think, and I sort of resonate with that, because the bottom line is when we're experiencing menopause, we're probably not 20 anymore. And we don't want to accept that something is going to be a little bit different. And I think with high achievers, as you describe, you don't want to say you can't do something. And so what you do is work harder and longer, and you run faster, you do all of those things to try and make that happen. Well, actually, we need to maybe have a bit of self-compassion and be a little kinder to ourselves. I remember a counsellor friend who I knew used to say to me, that's okay. And I thought, okay, no, it's not. It's not okay, isn't good enough. I'm sorry, it's not. It has to be more than that. But then I think as time goes on, then you accept that a little bit more. I don't think you ever ultimately change. I don't think you'll ever ultimately change, because that will still be in your head. But I think acceptance around it to be a little bit different is okay, in my experience.
I think what I would add to that is remember that you are still a high achiever and you're doing the best you can on that day. I mean, if I can use a open water swimming analogy, between 2008 and 2010, if I did not enter a race and go faster than the time I'd gone before, I would really beat myself up. And then I realised that there is no variable that remains the same in open water, because weather changes, water temperature changes, I change. And so I couldn't expect necessarily to go faster every time, because if I was swimming head to wind, you cannot swim faster than when the wind is behind you. And that's kind of the analogy. Right now, you're swimming head to wind, but you're still a high performer. And in a very few years, the wind will turn around and it'll be behind you, and you'll be swimming with the wind behind you, and you'll be going really fast again. So that's what I would say.
Sounds fantastic to me. A really good way of looking at it. And I suppose a concern I have about that thinking is, I think for myself, it was a significant contributor to my loss of confidence. That sort of feeling, oh, I'm not as good as I was, I'm not performing as I was, and failing to value, as Amanda has so eloquently said, what I was actually managing to do despite having huger hurdles, being hormone hurdles, as Linda has called them.
And I think just to add to that, one of my tasks or my roles as a police inspector was to do public order, and public order training is with your full kit on and your riot shield and everything like that. I never used to think I was brilliant at it, but I could do it, and it was all okay. And my anxiety first started to show around having to do this public order training. And so I did exactly what we all do. Right, okay, I need to learn more, I need to be better, I need to do more of it. And so I went to the public order training department and said, I need to be here more, I need to do more of this. And the guy who was running it said, do you have to do it? And it was like, oh, do I? Or is there an option? Is there a different option? And I went back to my boss and he said, well, don't do it then. And I know that isn't always a choice, and we can't always do that. But it was such a revelation to me to say, oh, well, don't do it then. I didn't even consider it an option, not an option.
Fantastic. We also have a question specifically in relation to barristers. So, Lindsay, this is you and me, which is how to raise the impact of menopause with clerks, usually male, often young. And, you know, a difficult conversation. Women may feel very uncomfortable about having that sort of conversation. Any thoughts?
I think I was always really struck by the fact that although we are living in a world where every Sunday supplement in the papers has something about menopause, you know, lots of it about it on the TV media, it's a world that's totally changed in terms of the openness of discussion. I think it was the Women Inequalities Committee survey the House of Commons did a year or two ago, which revealed that despite that advance, actually women are still really reluctant to actually speak to the people who about their own individual experiences with the people who might influence them. You know, senior leaders or in our case, clerks, other people who might be a hurdle if they don't understand. So you need to be able to speak to
and
them.
a help if they do understand.
And a help if they do understand. I was going to say, I mean, this may not be the answer to how you have that individual conversation, but I was going to say that I think training within chambers is a really good starting point, because if everybody is broadly on the same page in terms of, you know, what actually might be the range of symptoms and how it might affect your work, that is a much easier conversation to start than something cold. So I think my first tip would be try and ensure you've got a menopause policy and some training in place in chambers, and that's a good place to start a conversation with from there.
I would agree. It means the conversation, without it being personalised, is already happening. I think other things depend very much on the personalities involved.
Yeah.
Me, I came to realise when I first fell in love with a woman who was in chambers that the practice managers know way more about your life long before anyone else does. So as much as we might think we need to be private with them, they know it anyway. And having had that realization, I suppose I was less reluctant to be open and frank with them from there on in. And so when it came to the menopause, using humour to deal with my discomfort, I had conversations with them, and I can't say they've now had the benefit of training, that they fully understood what I was talking about, but the will try and help me, the will to understand that I was clearly having a difficult time and try and find ways to work with that and make that easier was definitely there from the beginning. And after all, if you want to look at it in cold commercial terms, you are a valuable product that you want to keep producing. And you know, they work very differently for different people, geared towards their needs, and it's helping them see that your needs and how you need to work has changed. That's all. It's changed. There'll be ways in which it's aligned with other people who are just like that because they're like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is, I like all slightly uncomfortable subjects that, you know, involve anything that people find embarrassing, whatever. The more euphemistic and indirect you are about it, the worse the conversation is likely to go. I think, you know, where you're just direct, confident, you know, maybe a little bit lighthearted and humorous, but you can actually sort of get into the conversation that way. That is going to be a better conversation and likely to be a better outcome and bring everybody on the same page, I think.
But maybe because it is very individual in terms of you as a personality and your practice team, if there are people in chambers who you think would be useful allies to perhaps chat that through with, who understand you and the personalities you're talking to. But I think the starting point has to be to encourage chambers to do some education, so the conversation is already happening. So we also have, do judiciary and barristers realise clients may be experiencing symptoms and make adjustments to allow for best evidence and instructions? Any thoughts around that? Amanda, you sit.
I mean, I think as a judge, it's our job to make sure that every individual in the court has access to and the right to participate. Would I think about it if it was a client sitting behind a barrister, sitting behind a solicitor? Possibly less than if it was a litigant in person. But I have been very aware of other. I try to scan the room and make sure that everybody is participating or able to participate in a way that's appropriate to their role. So this isn't a good example, but I noticed a man at the back of a court once that was wriggling a lot. And so I said to his barrister, if your client is uncomfortable because he's got a bad back or something, please, he should feel free to get up and walk around. I haven't noticed somebody having a hot flush, to be perfectly honest, or it manifesting themselves. But I would really like to hope that I would.
Bree, I think that following on from what Amanda just said, I may be entirely wrong because I don't sit in a sort of formal way here. But I thought that there was something in the equal treatment benchmark that has been introduced to help with this. Yeah.
There certainly has. And so, yes, certainly as a barrister, we should be thinking about it if we have any reason to think it's impacting a client or a witness and their evidence, and raising any questions that need to be addressed, whether it's the heat of the room.
I'm just embarrassed that I didn't already know it was in the equal treatment benchmark.
Sorry, Amanda, but it is, which is good. It's really good.
And it should be.
Yes, absolutely.
But as I said to somebody else yesterday, the equal treatment benchmark is actually majority common sense for the people who already have common sense, and it's absolutely necessary for the people who don't.
We have a question about the average period over which symptoms read somewhere 7 to 12 years. Well, I've certainly had 14 years.
Average 4 to 8 years. That is average, but certainly, yes, it can last longer than that. My own personal experience was 10 years. So yeah, it depends. But 4 to 8 is average.
And we had a question in the chat, but I'm not sure anyone's going to be able to answer this. Do you think that chronic RSI can be linked to menopause?
I certainly know that for some people, they experience real chronic aches and pains. That may well come under that. And I also know that for people who have had real issues around that, HRT has been something that has really been beneficial for them. So obviously I'm not a medic or a GP, but it might be certainly something to explore, especially if there's other symptoms around it as well, because that joint aches and pains, with that drop in estrogen, that can cause that to actually happen. So it may well be.
Certainly it was one of Fiona's.
Yeah.
She put it down to that, but it was yeah, I mean, she got one of those wrist things, but then she went on HRT and it improved.
I'm conscious we've slightly overrun. I think it's been a really interesting conversation with lots and lots of material covered. But perhaps I can give you each an opportunity if there's one thing you wanted to say that hasn't been said, and to ask, do you think that there is any reason why ultimately we start getting this right, menopause should be a barrier to the progression of women in their professional careers? So perhaps if I start with you, Lindsay.
I absolutely think it should not be, if it's managed properly, and all the signs are we're heading in the right direction. The conversation's opening up. We're having events like this. There are lots of other supportive, things that happen around the menopause, and I think that suggests to me that we'll get to a place where people feel much more confident and supported. I would, in terms of just having the one thing I'd like to say, definitely there is something I'd like to say, and it's this. I'm really conscious that in events like this, it can I think possibly come across as like a race to the bottom. Who can present the worst possible menopause experience, like the absolute most appalling example of brain fog or whatever it is, or pain, or it I think that's just the nature of the fact that not everybody's that confident about speaking about it. And so you end up asking people who have had quite tough times to come forward. I mean, my whole experience in the past many years I'm looking at this now has been that it is totally individual, as I said earlier, for everybody. It's not something to be worried about. There are loads of different solutions, and we've discussed some of them today. But I think the other thing is it's hugely empowering. It really, you become a person who is able to focus much more fully on the things that matter to you, because you're trying to juggle a lot of stuff in your life at the time, and that you give less of a hoot about the stuff that's unimportant. You surround yourself with people who support you, and those are really empowering things. So I just like to end on a positive, as I say, and please don't take anything as a sort of race to the bottom in terms of it's a terrible time. It's a mixed time for everybody, I think.
Amanda.
So I agree with what Lindsay's just said. I mean, I guess that my parting words would be, it's not that long ago that women didn't get maternity pay, that their careers were over when they got pregnant. It was very hard to get back into the workplace. Imagine a world 10 or less years away where your menopause symptoms are so severe that you actually have to take time off, but you get statutory menopause pay. That it's such a normalized recognition within the workplace that it's just seen as like a protected characteristic. I think we're headed there quite fast. And so, being open to the best of your ability, the same as being high performing. Some people are not good at being open, but allow other people to be. If yours is not to speak, let it be to listen.
Thank you, Amanda. And Linda?
In 1995, when I returned to work after 3 months of maternity leave, my boss wrote on my career review, "I am pleased to see that Linda has retained all the faculties that she had before she left to have a baby." 1995. I know that the world has changed. And so I think, and I agree with Amanda, that 10, 15 years' time, it won't be perfect, but it will be far better than it is now.
Thank
That's
you.
my dream.
And you're working very hard towards it, Linda. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. So I'm going to thank all of you. Thank the audience for taking part. There's been lots of stuff in chat, which is great. And my one thing is, yes, I really do believe that for the vast majority of women, menopause should not present a hurdle, a barrier, anything other than any other condition where it takes a minute to realize what's going on and to work out the solutions and to address it. Unfortunately, as you identified, Linda, for some people, it is much more physically and psychologically difficult. But then the world should, as it does with other things, cope with that and welcome them back when it's been addressed. My only other thing is look out for the next Menopause Cafe. It's a very different sort of evening. It's a relaxed event where people can come along. There's usually pizza, a bit of alcohol, a bit of soft drinks, a bit of music, and just a space to relax and talk amongst women who are postmenopausal, menopausal, perimenopausal, and younger women who want to understand what it's all about and be there to support us. And it's all about that sharing experience and support. So look out. Chancery Bar does those periodically. Watch out for them. Anyone can come. You don't have to be a member. So thank you very much. And I will say goodbye. Sorry we went over by 9 minutes.